My name is Mira Sys. I've been working at Flow Money for like 8 years now, mostly on environmental issues and crime and corruption, but also now on climate issues like carbon credits. And me and my colleague Ties Gijzel, we actually just wrote a book about climate compensation projects. So, for example, if you take a flight, you can always compensate the greenhouse gases by, for example, planting a tree or something like that. So we were wondering what is going on behind the scenes of this system, this worldwide system, because there's a lot of money in it, we already saw. So we decided to write a book about the whole thing. Wie betaalt mag vervuilen. Whomever pays may pollute. It's quite a complex system. So the carbon credits are actually, you can compare them with a piece of paper that says that somewhere in the world, 1 ton of carbon is taken out of the air. And that can either be by stopping certain factories of emitting as much as they would normally, or by taking it out of the air, for example, by planting a forest. So both can happen. And these carbon credits can be traded as well. So they can be traded as commodities. And you really have to look at it as some sort of paper promise, actually. Yeah. There's different actors in this world. So you have, at first, you have the project developer. And this project developer could be someone, for example, we saw a local Zimbabwean entrepreneur who had a lot of land. And he was like, okay, maybe I can protect the trees on my land, even though he didn't have that much. But then he can say like, okay, for normally the trees would be cut here en masse, and now I can just protect them. So I take a lot of carbon out of the air by protecting them, and I can generate a lot of carbon credits. So that's the project developer part. Then you have companies like Vera or Gold Standard who sort of give the permission that this project developer gets his carbon credits, because otherwise he can just say like, yeah, I took 1,000,000 tons of carbon out of the air and I just have 1,000,000 carbon credits. Who wants to buy them? But then everybody's like, yeah, but do you really have those million? Like, did you really do that? That's why foundations like Vera and Gold Standard are there, because they want to sort of verify that this is actually happening. So if they verify it, they actually give sort of a stamp of approval. And then this project developer can say like, okay, I have 1,000,000 carbon credits to sell, and Vera or Gold Standard or any of these foundations, they gave their stamp of approval. So it's true because it's verified. And then you have the buyers, and it's very often big companies like Shell, Chevron, like big oil companies, big polluters who buy these carbon credits like by the millions sometimes for very low prices. And then you also sometimes, not always, but sometimes you have traders in between. So who just buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell, and have margins of profits on these credits. So it's a real it's actually a bit like oil sometimes. It's really a commodity. The nice promise about it is that you have these big polluters and they pay to take CO2 out of the air or to protect forests or to plant trees even. So that's actually a very nice idea, a very nice promise. But of course, the promise is better than the reality. And we've seen, and not only we, but lots of scientists and investigators, journalists have seen that this promise is not actually true. Very often there's overestimation. Even like the foundations like Vera Gold Standard, they have made a lot of big mistakes in the past in terms of verifying the projects. It's very difficult also to verify all these projects and to make sure that everything is correct, because this project developer, for example, has a very big incentive to overestimate his carbon credits, because then he makes more money. So yeah, and in general, I say he, but in general, it's men, sadly, um, who make a lot of money and profit from this. And what we've seen is that it's not the environment who makes the biggest profits, or the local indigenous communities sometimes who actually protect forests, but it's mostly big companies, also mostly Western or from rich countries. So yeah, that's kind of the sad part of the story. Yeah, actually quite big roles. And the Dutch, they have a certain trading love for trade, I would say, in a bad way maybe. And what we've seen is that from the beginning, it's already 30 years ago that this whole idea started. Also, partly in the Netherlands. I think the Netherlands there was the second, the third, and the fourth project or something worldwide that we did in carbon credits. And it was because there was a big coal plant in the Netherlands that was going to be built, and people wanted to push it through, and they didn't really know how. So one of the ideas was, okay, maybe we can make it more popular by saying we will offset our emissions from this big coal plant somewhere else. And then first they looked into projects in the Netherlands. Leeuwardenbos is one of the projects that actually offset these emissions. But at a certain point, they noticed that in the Netherlands, it was not a lot of space. It was very expensive to plant trees. It was complicated with permits and land rights and everything. So they started going elsewhere. And of course, wherever it was cheapest. So they went to Latin America. They went to Africa, certain countries. So the first projects were aside from the Netherlands, were in Ecuador and Uganda. And people from the Netherlands went there and they started projects planting trees together with local communities. And the idea was that it's a win-win because people there would get jobs and then the Dutch would get their emissions offset. But of course, in reality, it was not as beautiful as portrayed. So what they would do is also work together with forest protection agencies, for example, in Uganda from the government. And that agency actually made sure that local people couldn't get into the forest anymore. So even people who really relied on the forest for livelihoods. So that was even like, I think for me, that was one of the worst parts of the whole thing, that like we admit we're like, here we're the bad guys with these emissions, and now we try to sort of make good, but then it also affects many local people who haven't like done anything wrong in this case. So yeah. I was actually very impressed also with the way they explained this complicated issue very well, also by the video. And I recognize many things. One of the things is that they also call it, I think, carbon colonialism or something like that. I really stand by those words because I feel like this is some new type of commodity that we extract from different countries that is not ours to take. And I mean, with ours, I mean the West. I don't mean me, but you get it. One of the things I feel like is important also here is that these commodities are now also valued in money. And what Western companies do, they go there, they basically take the money from the local like people, and then they sort of, that's another thing I really recognize. They promise a lot of things to certain people who want to collaborate, but there's a lot of people who don't get anything from it. So then you also create much division between communities as well, and even within communities. That's something we also saw a lot. What was interesting to me about that project was that they really found out where the money went, to even like relate it to elites within the country. And that's what you also see a lot, that governments profit, elites profit, but in general, not really the people who really take care of the forest or who really try to change anything. And that's something we see as well. We had one project in Zimbabwe, one of the biggest carbon credit projects in the world. And there you could also see that one local entrepreneur who was just like a smart businessman and doing all kinds of like, I don't know, shady business, I would say. Not only carbon credits, but everything like he could gain money from. And one of these things was the carbon credits. And he promised to even give some money back to communities. And it was a big part of this project. But in the end, when we, and especially my colleague Ties, went looking for like the money trails, they ran out very fast. And it was very clear that not all the money went to communities. There was no proof. A lot of the money went to tax havens even. So, yeah. based on all our research and for the book, but also elsewhere, we concluded that we call it sort of a fake solution because from scientific research, we know that more than 80%, maybe even more of these credits are basically not doing what they promised to do, are probably overestimated or wrong in another way, sometimes not additional. So for example, if you have a project that generates a lot of green energy, but maybe that was the plan all along, or the government was already imposing these projects, and then they're still generating carbon credits, then it's not doing anything extra for the environment. So that's also one of the big problems. Another big problem is the permanence of these credits. So for example, at this point, you can have someone who is really like wanting to do good for nature and wanting to protect the forest, and that's great, but maybe in 30, 40 years, someone else will be in power, someone else will be the owner of the land, and they would just cut down all the trees. We've seen it happen before. You cannot really promise that this project that would have to take years and years and years to compensate for the emissions will actually do that in the future. You cannot predict the future, basically. And I think it's also a way to sort of deflect from the actual problem sometimes. Or if you say like, oh, this is the solution, we can, if you go flying and you buy carbon credits, then it's cool. Like you've done your part, but we haven't. And that's one of the bigger problems, is that now even the European Union is doing it. Governments are doing it. They're trading their carbon credits, but they're not really doing something about the problem that we all have to do. At this point, I don't think it's the Dutch who are the most vocal about carbon credits, actually. It's more like the German industry. I heard the Italian industry as well. They were very much lobbying within the European Commission for getting access to these carbon credits. Because in Europe, we have this system where companies get carbon rights, it's called. It's something else than carbon credits. It's called a right of emission, and they at a certain point they all got some, and now these rights, it's a cap and trade system, so they gradually lower the rights that are given out to any sort of industry or company, and they have to buy more if they emit more than they have the right to. So the prices will go up and up and up. So at a certain point, it will be very expensive. To summarize, it will be very expensive to emit a lot of greenhouse gases. Now, a lot of these companies and industries are lobbying to get carbon credits into the system to give them more flexibility. But then, of course, we know that carbon credits are often based on false promises. So that will be, to me, it will be very difficult to accept it. But we already have seen it happening, that the European Commission said that for climate goals, we can use carbon credits now and everything like that. So it's going, in my opinion, it's going to the wrong direction at this point. It's a difficult one because I think all of us, all of these, but yeah, for example, the European Commission is one of these who can, like, even the scientific committee of the Commission says that carbon credits are not the solution, or at least they can maybe help for the like final emissions that we really cannot get rid of. But there's still a long way to go until that point, and even they say like it's a very bad idea to now give space for carbon credits instead of actual reduction. In general, I hope with our book that we can reach a lot of people and that we can make people see that this is not the way to go. And also, we don't have a perfect solution or something like this, but we would love to see energy and money go into thinking of another solution and not into this system, because there's a lot of money going into it. There's a lot of energy, a lot of, There were quite some, honestly, but yeah, one of the biggest ones was the colonial aspect of it. I didn't know it was that big. I didn't know it was that bad either, because we've seen a lot also here. This is not just one or two examples. It's really structural that indigenous communities are excluded from their lands, or from even like the money generated by the credits on their lands. One thing that really stood out to me was that from the beginning, this whole system is invented to avoid stricter climate regulation. even for the Netherlands and the US, so the first countries where these projects were taking place, it was already a way to avoid stricter climate regulation, to be able to say like, yeah, but we're doing our best because we're planting trees, so now we don't have to cut our emissions, right? And that's kind of what we see time and time again. And that's why we thought it was so important as well to write a book about it, because we only published about pieces of the puzzle, and we wanted to show that this system structurally for 30 years has been invented again and again and again. And every time we've seen the same problems occur and the same types of of fraud happen even. And we still think now it will work. And that's kind of, to me, it's kind of astonishing that this is still presented as a solution while we already tried it time and time again. That's one of the bigger problems, I think, also in the carbon market, is that there's no accountability since it's all voluntary. So there's not really one person who has to check everything or has to make sure independently that everything is true. So if something turns out not to be true, then all the claims that certain companies made, like we're green, we're net zero, those type of claims, they're not true anymore, but they don't have an obligation to say, oh, hey, we were in the wrong, we will sort of correct it. So that's why it's sort of a vague promise with no real substance. For a long time, it was very negative. People were like, see, the promises that were being made are false and we have to check more. And like that was really good, I think. It was more a critical stance towards these credits. But at the same time, now we see that it's going, like the trust is going up again for we don't know what reason. And the pattern that we've seen time and time again, that at a certain time there's more like climate skepticism maybe, or people are like, oh, but it's hurting the industries, we don't have to do something for the climate because we're not competitive anymore. And at those times you see the ask for flexibility, and then whenever that happens, then in general the answer is carbon credits. It's like, we want flexibility, okay, here's the carbon credits, this is the solution. So that's kind of where we're at right now, I think, again.